Well, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and to all the men who mother. Men mother. My story today is not about my mother, but about the most important mother in my life. And I will say that that is my paternal grandmother. My grandmother was such a phenomenal light in my life. I remember her many times telling the story of how she cooked, holding me in one arm and doing whatever she needed to do with the other, whether that was in the oven or whether that was on the eyes or whether that was in the refrigerator. She would always talk about how she never let me go. And she is the one who named me Cookie. Cookie, something that I kept secret for a long time and then told for a long time because it was so much cooler than that name Rosemary that I went by Cookie for a long time. And now I've reverted to Rosemary, or Rose, as most of those who have known me for a very long time long ago dropped the Mary. But my grandmother. So instead of talking about how you bake a cookie, although she certainly did that, today I'm going to tell my story and one of Sharon's favorite stories about how you bake a cake according to my grandmother. Now, we called her Big Mama. Now, she was not very big, but we called her Big Mama because she was the family matriarch and because she was revered. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Jefferson Banks. Many people called her, for short, May Liza, but those who were her grandchildren and even her sons came to only call her Big Mama. So my Big Mama, this incredible light in my life, would bake a cake for no reason at all. Just because Big Mama really knew how to make that cake sing. Now, she had a lot of talents, a tremendous amount of talent. She knew how to pick out a hat and how to position it on her head just right, especially on a Sunday morning. So she would wear those hats. It was amazing. She knew how to sing. She had this voice that sometimes I would listen in church in the children's section to hear my grandmother say, "Amen." And there was no mistaking that that was Big Mama, and we'd all look at each other and say, "Yes, she's here. She's here. She's in the place." And sometimes she would be called on to sing because that was one of her many talents. And she would be called on not just to sing any old gospel song, because anybody could do that. Lots of people could do that. She'd be called on to sing these old standards from her upbringing in the South. And they were called Dr. Watts. I've looked for Dr. Watt or Watts. I've not found that person, but those songs are hidden in my heart. And just for no reason at all, my Big Mama, who I'm going to tell you, had the original patent on I Love Jesus. The original patent would be called on to stand up and say, "I love the Lord, He heard my cry." And she'd go on and she'd sing those beautiful call and response hymns, and she was known for it all over Gary, Indiana. Talented. Now, one of her talents was not driving. She had 5 sons. There was really no reason for her to drive anywhere, but she never, ever learned how to drive an automobile. So when she came north from the great Magnolia state of Mississippi, she walked everywhere, and she had some sturdy legs. Black women are often known for their legs. Can I get an amen, Frank Lytle? She had those legs. She had those big legs. She walked all over Gary, Indiana. One of the things that I know about my grandmother is that my sense of justice stems from her, from watching her. She was one of the people, not documented, probably not known by everyone, who helped get the first African-American mayor of Gary, Indiana, elected. His name was Richard Gordon Hatcher. She walked everywhere talking about Dick Hatcher and why he needed to be the mayor of Gary. She had never done so. And in fact, in Mississippi, she had never, ever voted. I asked her once whether or not she walked from Clarksdale, Mississippi to Gary, Indiana, and she said, "Don't be ridiculous. I took the train." Like everybody. She took the train with her sister Ida Bell and with my grandfather, and they stopped in Waukegan, Illinois, where my father and his brother had already been sent to live with one of my grandfather's sisters. And they stopped and picked up my dad and my uncle, and they went to Gary, and they lived for a time in a big apartment house, one room for all of them, that was owned by my great uncle, a woman of many, 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 many talents, and certainly cake baking was among them. She knew how to bake a cake. I'm gonna tell you, she knew how to bake a cake. I loved my grandmother more than I loved shopping for dolls. It's one of the things that we did. One of the things that we'd do together was go to any thrift store, go to the Salvation Army downtown. We'd walk, of course. Sometimes on rare occasions, we'd go buy a new doll. But those new dolls just weren't as good as those old dolls. And I had a particular fetish about stripping dolls of their clothes. And then my grandmother, who had fabric everywhere, would help me to make another set of clothes for those dolls. So I like to strip them down, and then I'd like to build them up again. And from my grandmother, I learned how to shop for dolls at the Salvation Army. I learned how to make doll clothes. I learned how to comb dolls' hair. I learned how to make wigs for dolls. I was a doll stylist way before my time. And my grandmother, my big mama, who could bake a cake, was a celebrity chef way ahead of her time. Now, I would spend a lot of my time with my big mama, and she lived in a house where there were several big bedrooms, and her other grandchildren would all claim one of those other bedrooms, one of those other beds, because even when I was 18 years old, I slept with Big Mama. My sister, my youngest sister, 7 years younger than I'm the oldest, never even tried to claim my space in the bed. They knew, not that Big Mama didn't have enough love to go around, but that Cookie was her favorite. They acknowledged it. It was okay. Little tiny girl is gonna go sleep way on the other side of the house because Cookie is in Big Mama's bed. Now, my grandmother, I know that she's with Jesus right now because my grandmother was consistent about her Christianity. That is not a pejorative when you use it to describe Mary Elizabeth Jefferson Banks. It's just how you describe her. Every night, she went into her secret closet. I know that the evangelicals know what the secret closet is. She went into her secret closet. It was the bathroom. And she prayed every night without fail. There was never a time when she was too tired to go into her secret closet and pray. And pray. What's she doing in there? And pray. Gosh, I can't wait till she comes out. And pray, and pray, and pray. And sometimes you would hear her when it got really good to her. She would say, "Thank ya." And I knew that it was almost coming to an end. It's coming to an end now. She's in that thankful mode. Yes, she's gonna come to bed. Every night she'd come to bed. I'd be waiting for my big mama in bed. You done, big mama? She'd go, yes, oh, I love the Lord. He heard my cry and pitied every groan. And she'd come to bed and we'd read always. Not once, not twice, every time. A few Bible verses before we would relax and turn on the radio and listen to Dave Baum. Dave Baum, who always ended his radio show with, put the coffee on, Mama, Daddy's coming home. So we'd wait for that, and then she'd turn off the lights. My big mama. She knew how to bake this cake called life. You know, I only know of my grandmother who picked cotton in the great Magnolia state of Mississippi, the great murderous state of Mississippi that she told me way back when had killed a young boy named Emmett Till, not because he whistled at a white woman, but because he was from Chicago and he had nice clothes on. And because he had a little money in his pocket that his mother, I know you've seen Mamie Till in history, had given him, and because he talked like white folks from the North. And that's why Emmett Till was killed in Money, Mississippi. She would not let me get out of childhood without these stories that I just couldn't understand. But why would they kill him, Big Mama? Because he had a little money in it? Well, like how much money? Were they robbing him? You know, was it because was it because he spoke well? Because he sounded like white folks from Chicago? How do white folks from Chicago sound, Big Mama? And she couldn't repeat it. But that was why Emmett Till had to die. She thought it was important that I knew that Dave Baum was on the radio because she even then envisioned me as a journalist. And I spent 25 years of my life in newspapers, in newsrooms. But she knew that in order to survive in them, I'd need to know about Emmett Till. I'd need to know that 79 million people of African descent died in the Middle Passage before they even got to the United States, to North America and South America, and all of the various places that those slave ships went. 79 million people died in the Middle Passage before we even had slavery in this country. So she knew that I would need to know that in order to survive. But she also knew that I'd need to know how to bake a cake. So Big Mama had worked once. She had one job that I knew about other than I knew that she picked cotton in Mississippi and she could pick it faster and better than anybody, and I believed it. I believed it because my father verified it. And he never lied, okay? He never lied or said the word lie. It was a story. It was never a lie. So you better not say lie to my father, Johnny Banks Sr. So she had one job that I knew of, and it was as a housekeeper to a woman who lived in a part of Gary, Indiana, and her name was Margie. And I never forget Big Mama talking about Margie well before, I actually became her personal assistant. But Margie had a beautiful home in Glen Park that she had gotten in the divorce, and it was always the divorce, because you didn't divorce back then. I'm the first person in my family to ever get a divorce. Tragedy, sin that it was, shame on you. Pour some holy water on her. Margie had gotten the big house in Glen Park in the divorce, but her children were terrors, a boy and a girl. And my grandmother would always say, and they're not even blonde, and they act like they rule the roost. Talk about self-oppression, okay? They're not even blonde, and they act like that. And she would talk about Margie, and she finally decided that she was going to leave Margie's employ. And Margie said that there would never be another housekeeper because there would never be another one like May Liza. And my grandmother told me that when she departed on that last day, Marjorie gave her a $50 bill, very crisp, gave her an almost brand new mink stole. She wore it with pride, and she'd always tell people where she got it. She got it from her lady, as she called her. Even to her death, she remembered her lady. And Margie baked a cake, and the cake was inedible. Margie could do a lot of things. She knew how to pick out the right mink stole, but she did not know how to bake a cake. And she told my grandmother, I'm going to miss you so much, May Liza. And my grandmother said she's going to miss me taking care of those bad kids, taking care of her big house, and baking her cakes. And now I'm going to bake cakes for you. My favorite was the jelly cake, the 4-layer jelly cake. And my mother, who knew how much I loved my Big Mama, was convinced that that was why. I know why you love Miss May Liza more than you love me. It's because of the jelly cakes. And that day that my mother found me crying downstairs under my father's bar where all the nice brown and clear liquids were kept that we weren't supposed to touch, she found me crying and she wanted to know what had happened, who had hurt me, what had gone on, what's wrong. And I said, Mom, I didn't want to come home from Big Mama's. And she said, you make me sick. I made sure that my own daughter was going to love me more than anybody. I said it in her sleep. Love me more than anybody. Love me like I love Big Mama. Love me more than anybody. Love me like I love Big Mama. I said it when she was in the womb. It worked. I loved my mother, and I still do. My mother is a beautiful lady. She is young and beautiful. I love looking at her because I'm thinking I'm going to inherit that. It's so wonderful. I'll look like that when I'm in my 70s. It'll be beautiful. She was beautiful then. She's beautiful now. She's a wonderful mother. But there was just no mother like Big Mama. There just wasn't. You know, one of the things that I've always carried is her sense of justice, her sense of fairness, her love for the sacred, no matter how you view that. And I realized that I'm standing in front of this beautiful altar. And so Big Mama would pause. She would pause because she would know that this is real, because she knew such things. She taught me, without knowing it, to honor all things that people consider sacred, not just Jesus, even though she would tell you to love Jesus first and then love Buddha and Allah, but Moses. And I learned that sense of inclusion from her, and I learned how to bake a cake. So this is how you bake a cake, according to Mary Elizabeth Jefferson Banks, my Big Mama. 1, you've got to make sure that all of the ingredients are at room temperature. If you pull the eggs and the milk out of the refrigerator and then mix it all together, that's going to be a mess. And she would tell you, so baby, don't do that, baby, wait. She could even help you by dropping the eggs in a cup of hot water. They're going to be warm in just a minute, she'd say. She only used the finest ingredients that she could buy. So it was the best that she could buy. And she had 5 sons who gave her an envelope every 2 weeks. I told you she only had one job. My grandfather was gone. Those 5 sons did it. She'd only buy the finest ingredients that she could buy. She'd say, always buy the best that you can and use it forever. She knew how to reuse things before people were talking about sustainability. You know, she never threw anything away. She could recycle it, and she wasn't a big old clutter hog like I am. I did not get my organizing from the organizing of the clutter from Big Mama. But, so always make sure that everything is warm, because she was just that kind of person. She was warm. She radiated it. Always make sure that you buy the finest ingredients that you can buy, which meant don't judge your life by somebody else's standard. You know, do the best that you can do. And she would say, don't think that you can make a great cake by throwing in a handful of this and a pinch of that. She knew that there was a recipe, and for her, that was the model that you went by. She'd have me, I was the penmanship champion of Daniel Hall Williams Elementary School in Gary, Indiana. And now I can't write after 25 years of furiously scribbling notes as a journalist. But she would have me transcribe her recipes, and she would say, I don't have to remember them. That's why you have recipe cards. Duh. Remember something else. So she would go by the recipe, and she would tell me that other people might be able to fudge the recipe, but your family picked cotton in Mississippi. You can't fudge the recipe. Your family, you think they walked, let's say they walked. They walked from Mississippi to Gary. Never forget it. Your family has a standard. Make sure that you honor it. I think probably that's why I had to become the first college graduate, because that was the standard. It was such a high standard. It was making sure that you followed whatever these rules were that were going to get you to where you were going. I hold that in my heart now, her sense of precision. I'm often not that precise. I don't claim to be, but I know what the standard is, and I know that it works. I hold in my heart her sense of justice for all people. In the neighborhood where she lived on 13th and Adams in Gary, Indiana, there were African Americans from the South, and there were those from the Midwest. There were people who had come from China and opened businesses. There were Jewish people who lived there. There were Latinos who, at that time, we just called them Mexican. Imagine that. And everyone in this urban community lived and raised their children together. Now, I'm going to tell you that if you go to Gary, Indiana right now, it's one of the most segregated places in the Midwest. People don't live together in that way that they used to, and they've lost something. They forgot the wisdom of those who would have walked if they'd had to, but there was a train. So they didn't have to. They've forgotten some of what built the city and enabled there to be a first mayor of color, and people like my big mama who had put them there. They've forgotten quite a few things, but I never have. I never have. And especially, I've never forgotten how to bake a cake according to my big mama, Mary Elizabeth Jefferson Banks. Thank you so much.